Hallo, ek is Iti. Welkom by my kanaal waar ons als saam doen. In this video, I teach you some more voegwoorde. Voegwoorde are conjunctions, and I also teach you how to use these conjunctions in Afrikaans conditional sentences. Now, the voegwoorde that we are looking at today are the following: DAT, SODAT, and OMDAT. DAT, SODAT, and OMDAT belong to the same group of conjunctions that we looked at in the previous video of voordat and nadat. As you can see in the speech bubble, all of these conjunctions adhere to the same rule when it comes to how sentences are put together and how the parts change. But just keep in mind that, as with everything else, there are always some exceptions. The rule for this group of conjunctions states that part 1 of your sentence, when you add two sentences together with a conjunction in the middle, part 1 follows the Stompie word order, more specifically the Stompie word order of verb 1 just after the subject, and then later on you'll find verb 2. But in part 2, for all of the conjunctions in the speech bubble, the verb order changes. What most often happens is then in part 2 you'll find verb 1 at the back of the sentence. Now that said, I have found that sometimes in some of these conjunctions, when you use them, you'll find that in part 2 the verb order remains the same. With if you have a verb 1 and verb 2, you'll have verb 1 first, then verb 2. Sometimes both at the back of the sentence, sometimes not even. But those are exceptions. As for most, they follow the general rule of part 1, verb order remains that of Stompie, and in part 2, verb 1 moves to the back of the sentence. Also remember that when you change them around and you start the sentence with the conjunction, which is then immediately followed by part 2, then you find that verb 1 just before the comma, and you will find the following sentence, the part 1 that has now moved to after the comma, you'll find that one's verb 1 just after the comma. So you'll have two verb 1s next to each other, one before and one just after the comma. I will demonstrate that to you way more throughout the rest of the video. Before we move on and take a look at the individual conjunctions in this video, I'm going to demonstrate the rule to you by using the two sentences given in this blue-purple box below. You'll see sentence 1 there is ek gaan kos koop, which means I am going to buy food. And the second sentence is die kinders is honger. The children are hungry. Now, we are going to use OMDAT, which means because, to add these two sentences together so that they have a dependent relationship or a causation relationship. Remember, the word OMDAT, which we will take a look at later in the video, means because. But there's another word in Afrikaans, want, which is also the word for because. And I will explain more when to use which one later in the video. Getting back to these two separate sentences, we are now going to add them together. So the first sentence, ek gaan kos koop, that is part 1. You'll see ek gaan kos koop. As part 1, it remains, the verb order remains the same. Then you have omdat, die kinders honger is. Now that verb 1, is, which in the initial sentence was die kinders is honger. You found verb 1 just after the subject as per Stompie word order. But if this sentence, die kinders is honger, is now part 2 in a conditional sentence, that verb 1 moves to the back of the sentence. It's no longer right after the subject. Then, if you have the conjunction in the beginning of the sentence, like omdat is now in the beginning, omdat die kinders honger is. Part 2 now follows directly after omdat, and is right before the comma. Verb 1 of that part 2, which is now in front, is right before the comma. Right after the comma, you'll find part 1. And the difference there is now you'll find verb 1, which usually comes after the subject. When part 1 is after the comma, you'll find that verb 1 and the subject have swapped places. You'll find that verb 1 directly after the comma before the subject. So just remember that. Dat means that. That can be a conjunction. It could also be some other things. For instance, dit en dat means this and that. But in this context, we're looking at it as a conjunction. Sentence example there. Dit is 'n wonderwerk dat hy nog lewe. Which means it is a miracle that he is still living. If you wanted to say it is a miracle that he is still alive, your Afrikaans sentence would be, dit is 'n wonderwerk dat hy nog lewendig is. Right, so you'll see that I made the dit in that first sentence purple. And that is because when we look at the second sentence where the conjunction moves to the beginning in the case of dat, you find that dit is no longer in the sentence. And this is specifically something that you find with dat as a conjunction. So dit, which is it is a miracle, dit. In the first sentence, it's still there. But then we look at the second sentence, dat is now in the beginning, dat hy nog lewe. And you'll see their lewe is now just before the comma. And then part 1, the verb is now moved to just after the comma, is 'n wonderwerk. But dit is nowhere to be found. Dat hy nog lewe is 'n wonderwerk. We will never say dat hy nog lewe is dit 'n wonderwerk. Of dit is 'n wonderwerk. Not in this way. If the dat is in the beginning, dit will not be there anymore. You can't add dit. So I'll show this to you in more examples just after this explanation. Sometimes I notice little things, and in the case of dat, there are sometimes a sentence that you can only use dat in the middle of the sentence as a conjunction, but that same 2 sentences, you can't use the dat with part 2 in the beginning. It doesn't work out. If you wanted to take, let's say, 2 separate sentences that you can add together using a dat in the middle, and then you want to add one of those sentences in the beginning now, to keep the meaning the same, you'll have to change the conjunction that's in the beginning. I will demonstrate this to you just now, using the purple sentence in my examples. But for now, let's look at the first ones. And what I have noticed is that if you have a sentence with a dat in the middle, that can be changed to have part 2 in the beginning with dat in the beginning as well. Usually, when you add the dat in the beginning and the English is the that in the beginning, you can say the fact that. And I'll demonstrate that to you. You can add the fact in front of that in the beginning of the sentence, and it makes sense. But you cannot do that with the ones that you can't, that can only be used in the middle and not in the beginning. I will demonstrate that to you. Just hold on a minute. All right, so the first sentence says, dit gaan my verstand te bowe, dat sy ma hom nog nie uitgeskop het nie. I'm smiling because I have personal experience. Anyway, dit gaan my verstand te bowe. That phrase in Afrikaans means, literally translated, it goes above my mind or it goes above my understanding. The correct translation would be, it is beyond me or it blows my mind. Either one. So that's what it means. It is beyond me or it blows my mind that his mother hasn't kicked him out yet. Also take note of the double negative and the way we use it in these sentences and how it moves from when dat is in the middle of the sentence as opposed to when dat is in the beginning of the sentence and what happens to the double negative. Because when you have a double negative, when you have a negative, you have to have another one. And the second negative in Afrikaans, that second nie, is at the back of the sentence always. I don't ever want to say always in Afrikaans because there's always an exception. But you'll find nie at the back. Even if it's a case of where verb 1 has moved to the back, you will find nie after verb 1. So nie is the one that wins the place of the one being last in the sentence. So we look at dat now in the beginning for that first sentence example. Dat sy ma hom nog nie uitgeskop het nie. Gaan my verstand te bowe. Now the English is that his mother has not kicked him out yet is beyond me or blows my mind. You can add the fact that his mother has not kicked him out yet is beyond me or blows my mind. That is what I meant by if that can be moved to the front with part 2 and it still makes sense. You will be able to add the fact that before the that. The fact before the that. And it will make sense. The next example. Ek dink dit is belaglik dat ons so vroeg moet opstaan. I think it is ridiculous that we must get up so early. And then you can move that to the front. It becomes dat ons so vroeg moet opstaan. Dink ek is belaglik. And then you look at the English. That we must get up so early, I think, is ridiculous. You can now, again, add the fact that we must get up so early, I think, is ridiculous. So then you know, okay, fine. These two can be used both way around. The last two sentences there is a demonstration of when you can't just move that to the front with part 2 and it still makes the same kind of sense. Die musiek was so hard dat ek nie myself kon hoor dink nie. The music was so loud that I couldn't hear myself think. In this case, you cannot simply move that with part 2 to the beginning and then add part 1 after the comma. It does not make sense. So you can't say dat ek nie myself kon hoor dink nie. Die musiek was so hard. It doesn't make any kind of sense. The only way you can sort of change it, and that's using a different conjunction to mean sort of the same thing. Ek kon nie myself hoor dink nie, want die musiek was so hard. I couldn't hear myself think because the music was so loud. So you can write it with a different conjunction, and it means sort of the same thing, but in the case of this sentence, you cannot take that and part 2 and just simply move it to the beginning. It doesn't work. It doesn't have a meaning. It just does not work. So keep that in mind. It's still very important to listen to Afrikaans things, read Afrikaans, watch Afrikaans as much as you can, because these kind of things is something that you will identify more easily when you hear it. Because if you don't hear the language, in these cases, because it's exceptions, or they just don't follow the norm, if you don't, you will just change the sentence and think that that is the way it should be done or said, and then it doesn't make sense. SODAT, so that. If you look at the examples on screen, you'll notice that I did not provide an example where the sentence starts with SODAT. Now, that does not mean that it's incorrect to start a conditional sentence with SODAT in Afrikaans. You can start a conditional sentence with SODAT. It is grammatically correct, but it sounds weird. It's almost like the meaning is not exactly the same, even though it is. And for the most part, we don't use SODAT in the beginning of a conditional sentence in general when we speak, when we write, although you can, it's just less used. And for the most part, we use it in the middle of the sentence, like in these examples. But I will provide another example for you just now, where I use it in the beginning of the sentence, so that you can just see that it's possible, but it definitely is not the first choice. The first choice will be in the middle or between two parts of a sentence. So let's look at the examples. Hy oefen daagliks sodat hy kan fiks bly, which means he exercises daily so that he can remain fit. Hy eet minder sodat hy nie gewig optel nie. He eats less so that he does not pick up weight. Some more examples using SODAT. Trek 'n langbroek aan sodat jy nie koud kry nie. Put on long pants so that you don't get cold. Wag jou beurt af sodat almal 'n kans kry om sy hand te skud. Wait your turn so that everyone gets a chance to shake his hand. Now take note, in this Afrikaans sentence example, yes, the verb has moved to the back, but the back is not the back. The back is where it would normally be if there is no infinitive in that sentence. But this sentence example includes an infinitive, and the infinitive part, that om sy hand te skud, that infinitive is still at the end of the sentence. It's still at the back. You'll find that verb just in front of it, and yes, the verb order has changed from where it was when the sentences were two separate sentences. So it has moved, and it has only moved to the back that is still in front and before the infinitive. So that is just something to keep in mind, that when sentences become a little bit more complex, things does not always follow, things do not always follow the laid out, set out pattern that the rules state. Then we look at the next example. Ek gaan klaar eet sodat ek nie later honger raak nie. I am going to finish eating so that I don't get hungry later. And now the last example, that one starts with sodat. Sodat hy kan fiks bly, oefen hy elke dag. So that he can remain fit, he exercises every day. And you can say it this way around. You can also say it the normal way, which we would usually prefer to say, which is hy oefen elke dag sodat hy kan fiks bly. So we would opt for that option, using it in the middle when we speak. But again, it is grammatically acceptable either way around. OMDAT, because. OMDAT is one of the words for because in Afrikaans. The other one, which I think is possibly used more often, that is want. But want, when it's used in conditional sentences, are only used in the middle. You don't usually start a conditional sentence with want in the beginning, and then like part 2, and then after the comma part 1. Want you will find in the middle. Want always has a comma before it. OMDAT does not when it's in the middle of the sentence. So OMDAT and all of its friends in the speech bubble that I showed you in the beginning, they do not get commas before them as a rule when they're in the middle of the sentence. But if you want to accentuate something, there's nothing that stops you. If you really want to pause before OMDAT, I think you can still add a comma for effect, but it's not the rule. Want and its friend maar, which is the word for but, they get a comma always in front of them. No. So want, never used in the beginning of a sentence when it's a conditional sentence, but want, like sodat, if somebody asks you a question like, why are you so late? Hoekom is jy so laat? And you can say, want ek het verslaap, because I overslept. So it'll usually be the case, it's in the beginning of a sentence when you're giving a one sentence answer. It won't be in the beginning if it's a conditional sentence. I'm just like stumbling over my words now. Okay, I'll explain in the end of the video why I'm a little... Ek het geslaap omdat ek moeg was. I slept because I was tired. You can also say ek het geslaap want ek was moeg, which would mean the same thing. Ek het geslaap I slept because I was tired. But OMDAT has a more of a causation feeling. OMDAT. Want feels just want, it's like a blah compared to OMDAT, which really embodies because causation. Alright. Then, moving OMDAT to the beginning of the sentence. Omdat ek moeg was, het ek geslaap. You can't say, want ek moeg was, het ek geslaap. You can't say, want ek was moeg, het ek geslaap. None of those work. So you cannot. If you had want in the middle of the first sentence, you cannot put it in front. Only omdat can be used like this. Sentence examples with omdat. Ek is kwaad vir hom, omdat hy so onbeskof was. I am angry with him because he was so rude. And the other way around, omdat hy so onbeskof was, is ek kwaad vir hom. Because he was so rude, I am angry with him. Ek was kalm, omdat ek 'n glas wyn gedrink het. I was calm because I drank a glass of wine. And the other way around, omdat ek 'n glas wyn gedrink het, was ek kalm. Because I drank a glass of wine, I was calm. And then you see I marked it as an exception at the bottom. It's not necessarily exception as it is just more complicated. Ons het al ons geld verloor. That's simple, straightforward part 1. Omdat hy nie wou ophou dobbel nie. Right. Not only do you have a double negative in part 2 there, but you have 3 verbs. I will try and explain the position of each verb to you. Remember that we have the Stompie acronym, right, with verb 1 and verb 2. And verb 1 simply means that it is the auxiliary verb's place, meaning the helping verb, hulpwerkwoord in Afrikaans. Verb 1 does not necessarily refer to the first verb in the sentence as much as it refers to the hulpwerkwoord, the auxiliary verb. But I found that often it says you move in part 2 of these words in the speech bubble, you move verb 1 to the back of the sentence, meaning that if you had a verb 1 and verb 2, you'll have verb 1 at the end in part 2. And so if you had a past tense sentence where it was ek het geskop, when it's the other way around, het will be at the back. But I found that some of the other auxiliary verbs, some of the other hulpwerkwoorde, like sal and gaan and wou and kon, there's quite a few of them, when they are in part 1 or they are in part 2, the word order remains the same. It goes verb 1, verb 2, and that doesn't change. And now I don't know if there's something I'm missing. But I looked at the stuff and I was like, so we've got this definition, but then in the case of the other auxiliary verbs, the word order doesn't change. So that's what's going on here. We have wou ophou. Wou is an auxiliary verb. It's a hulpwerkwoord. It's verb 1. Wou. Ophou, that would be verb 2, right? But then we have ophou doppel. Is also part of that situation. Ophou dobbel, I think, is one concept. Stop gambling is like one concept. But it's another verb in that sentence. Irrespective, if you discount dobbel and it's not in the sentence, wou is still verb 1, and it is in part 2 of this sentence after. Wou is still before the second verb. So it's not after, it's not at the end. It's wou verb 1, ophou verb 2, dobbel, right? They follow the normal word order of Stompie, which theoretically, according to the rule, wou should be at the end of the sentence, right? So, yeah, there are some things that you can't follow to a T. A lot of the rules cannot just be followed exactly as is, because when the language becomes more complex, more complicated, there are a lot of the times things are changed around. So most of these things aren't completely rigid. And then if you move OMDAT to the beginning, omdat hy nie wou ophou dobbel nie, het ons almal geld verloor. Okay, so it's been wild. My weeks have been wild. I've been doing another coaching qualification, which at this time is the more advanced competitive coaching thing, which I initially did not plan on taking on this winter, and then I changed my mind. And so I have done the theoretical part, written the exam, and I now have to log hours with coaches that are qualified level 1 or above. So I'm driving to other towns to go log hours on a pool deck with different clubs and different coaches, while I still have to coach in the town where I live. And although winter coaching is far less at this point in time than summer coaching, I still have to work, and then I try and make YouTube videos, and I also have another online thing that I'm working on. So I think I've overextended myself slightly, and my mind is tired. I don't get around to everything that I want to get around to. But I've tried my best to convey these concepts as well as I can. Again, side note, I'm not an Afrikaans teacher. I'm just an Afrikaans speaking individual who is very interested in languages, amongst other things. But I am a swim coach. I'm a swim coach, so if I do make mistakes and somebody that is very well versed in Afrikaans, if you would like to point that out to me in the comment section, please do. If you want to correct me, please do. I appreciate all assistance. I try my best to first speak to knowledgeable people about the content if I have questions before I post the videos or finish the videos. But even then, some mistakes still slip through the cracks. So I do apologize if there are mistakes. If you have more questions about this topic, please post it in the comment section. If you have suggestions or requests for anything else, also post that in the comment section. Have an awesome day. I'll see you in the next video.